So last month we did a challenge that revolved around journaling and reflection and thinking about memory. But before we talk about that, I wanted to announce the challenge for this month. I know we're a couple days in, so we're going to call it a 3.5 week challenge for April. But here's what you do: pick something that you've wanted to do for a long time, or you just think would be a fantastic thing, new habit. For me, I'm going to be playing piano, which is something I haven't done in years, or at least I haven't been able to get a sustained habit of playing piano going. And what you're going to do is you're going to pick a specific cue. So it could be, I wake up and I grab a cup of coffee, and that's what cues me to go do this thing. It could be, worst case, you just set a reminder every day at the same time or something. But I think ideally it's something a little more organic. You identify the cue, and then you go do this thing for 2 minutes, and that's it. And your objective here, now this, I know this is a little bit controversial, let's get to that, but your objective is to focus all of your energy, all the effort, all the excitement that you have about this thing that you've always wanted to do, and you're gonna take that and smear it across the entire month, to where every day you're gonna have that excitement about making this habit, not about doing the thing, not about becoming the best piano player in the world, about making this new habit that you have so far failed to do. What are you gonna do?
I'm going to start writing fiction. Something I've just always kind of wanted to do. I've always had little ideas that I've always wanted to write about and always been a little too scared to write about them.
Yeah.
I think I always expected to be able to write before starting to write. So
Right, which
I'm
is
just going to start writing. So every day, after I take my shower at night, I'm just going to sit down and write for 2 minutes.
okay. Now I know that I get that the 2 minute thing is a little bit controversial, right? So I am going to start out for the first week being pretty strict about I will do it for 2 minutes. If you want to interpret this a little bit differently, you could say, okay, the challenge is to do it for 2 minutes, so that's your goal, and then if you keep going after that, that's fine. But you check off the day if you did 2 minutes, right? So I'm kind of fine with that. This is something that we made up to do, right? It's not like this is the word of God and how you have to do this thing, but just at least understand the spirit of this, which is to invest as much of your energy as you can into establishing the habit, not the thing. Because the logic behind it is that we tend to not recognize how truly difficult it is to create a habit that stays around and sticks in our lives. And we invest all of our energy just into the thing. We get super excited. We just like, oh man, I'm playing piano now. And you do it for hours and hours. And then sure enough, you fizzle out. And again, this is something you have failed to do so far. So, if it's going to be different this time, you got to do something different with it. So that's the goal. And you can interpret the time rule how you want. But I'm going to be pretty strict about it, at least to start with.
Yeah, I think that's a good plan.
Okay.
But, okay. That'll be at the end of the month.
Yeah.
We'll talk more about that later. But the last month, we wrote in our journals every night, trying to recall things that happened during the day. Just to see, well, it started out kind of as this experiment of memory. How much can you recall? And does it help you remember things on a regular basis? But then it kind of spun out of control into, what are all the cool things you can do with writing and journaling? And I don't know. This kind of went in all different directions. At least for me, it did.
Oh, no, same.
But I guess let's start out with the actual challenge, which was writing about your day. How did that go for you?
So here's what I want to say first. And this is not a very deep observation. This is kind of shallow. But I bought a Moleskine, whatever journal, right? One of those little super thin ones that you can fit in your pocket really nicely, and it fits great. in my back pocket. At the bookstore, I found they sold these little like adhesive pen thingies that you just kind of
What?
stick on there. They're really cheap. And then it just holds the pen, and it's just the right width where it still fits in my pocket, right? So it's like it all just kind of lines up right. And then I was carrying this in my back pocket, and I was thinking, man, it's kind of annoying because my wallet is sort of thick, so I wind up with this really thick back pocket. So I shopped around on Etsy and found this little like leather kind of wallet. I don't know, super slim thingy. Do you have one too? Is that what
Actually,
you're
had
showing
bought
me?
the exact same one
Did you really? That's super
a
lame.
couple months ago. Yeah,
Great.
it's kind of funny.
Good job, us. So now it's really flat and it sits in my pocket really nice, and it's like this nice brown leather thing. So I never mind actually writing in it. It makes me really happy. It's hard to explain, but it sparks joy for me having this thing with me all the time. And I can't I'm not going to get into this conversation, but I can't help but compare it to a phone because it occupies the same spot on my body, right? Back pocket, I can reach for my phone or I can reach for this little journal thing. And the journal just creates a different feeling where my phone always wants something from me. It has its own agenda and everything that goes with that. But every time I open the phone, it's trying to get me to get sucked into something and whatever and all that, right? But this doesn't. This is just mine. And I can write in it. I can make a grocery list, or I can,
It has no
hash out
bad
thoughts.
intentions, right? It
Yeah,
has no
it
bad
doesn't-
intentions against you. Yeah.
It's just here for me. Like it's here for me, and my phone has its own agenda. I'm here for it. It's trying to get me to something, trying to get me to up somebody's monthly active user count to get more investment, whatever.
Well, this is exactly why I told you that you should use paper instead of your computer.
Yeah,
when we
I
were
was-
talking about this originally. Yeah.
I was very annoyed at that. You were super right. Great job. This just makes me, and again, this is a very surface level observation, but
Yeah, but I think I don't know. I think that's actually really important.
yeah,
That we just forget that paper and pen are actually really, I don't know, they're so tactile and they're
yeah.
just fun.
And if I sit down and I write in the journal, I'm never upset that I did that.
Yeah.
I never get done journaling and go, oh my God, it happened again. Why can't I quit this? Every night I get sucked into my journal and I want to stop, but I just, no, it like leaves me happy. And it just makes me think that in my life, I want to do more things that are like that. Like, why don't I prioritize stuff that makes me that I walk away from thinking, yeah, I feel better than before, whereas I often enough wind up doing stuff that's the opposite.
Well, I'm really glad you said that because I've had this love of sketchbooks for so long. So I have all these black moleskin sketchbooks, but then now I'm getting and I used to have them for writing, but now I'm getting them again, and now I got like 5 or 6 of them, and I don't know, it's just really fun.
Yeah, there's something just really satisfying about it. It's like buying a pair of boots that are going to last a really long time. Like, yeah, we're going to be together for a while. It's just a nice feeling.
Right.
It really is.
Okay. Well, let's move on to what you actually wrote about.
Well, okay,
So,
I just talked for a while. What did you write about? I mean,
Okay, so at the very beginning of the challenge, I was doing really good. And what I would do is you just have a normal day, and then at the end of the day, you sit down and you write about all the stuff that happened in the day. So I'd sit down, set the timer for 10 minutes, and then start writing about the day. And I'd be like, okay, I woke up at this time, I had coffee, and then I went outside, whatever. And then the timer would go off, and I'm like, oh, okay, I got about 15 minutes into my day. And so I'd have to set it again and again and again. And it ended up taking me like an hour and a half to get through my day. And that's, rushing through a lot of parts of it. And so I realized that I can't write down everything in the day. So I started changing that to where some days I would skip over the morning routine because it was basically the same.
Right.
And then sometimes I'd start at lunchtime at work, or whatever. Just at some point of the day that seemed a little bit more important, I'd start then. But I realized that I can actually remember a good amount of stuff, which I think, by the way everyone was talking about, that seemed to be the case. Everyone was pretty surprised at what they're able to remember. But what I thought was interesting is that all the stuff I was remembering, if I had not been doing this little journal thing, I never, ever would have thought about it again. And that was kind of eye-opening about all the stuff that happens during the day that I just will never, ever think about again because there's just no reason for me to think about. I don't know. I just thought that was interesting. Did that happen to you too?
I mean, we're clearly a bit obsessed with the idea of spaced repetition, and I would like to make the argument that just memory is spaced repetition. That's how you remember stuff. And in a way, it's like this is the simplest, most straightforward form of spaced repetition, which is something happens that creates a memory, but it's ephemeral and it starts to fade, and then you sit down and you try to recall that thing. And so you, after some duration of time, you recall it, and it's actually surprising sometimes how much you can recall. And that kind of crystallizes this memory a little bit, where it tells your brain, hey, this thing, we're thinking about it again. Maybe it's kind of important. And let's hang on to that rather than just throw it out when we, get rid of
Right.
everything and start fresh for the next day.
But
And
I've noticed. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
no, just I went over to a friend's house, Sam and I, and it was just kind of a casual, like, hey, come over. We got a new fire thing, so we'll hang out in the backyard by the fire pit. And we were there for an hour and a half, something like that. And we just, had a drink and talked and hung out, and it was nice. And then I went home, and I think already journaled some that day. And so it was the next day, or maybe even the day after, where I think it was Ryan saying something in the Discord about how like he was trying to recall stuff from days before. It's like, oh, I'm gonna try to do that. So I basically just journaled about this little evening where we went over there, and it was actually really cool to sit there and think back. And at first I'm like, I don't really remember what we talked about, but I'm thinking about it, and then it starts to come to me like, oh yeah, actually this was a pretty interesting conversation, and I kind of learned this thing about I don't know, just all the stuff we talked about, and I'm like
Right.
unraveling it all, and it's a surprising amount of stuff, and I still remember it now because I know that I never would have. I wouldn't have even remembered that we did that, but the fact that I
Right.
had to recall it all and even write it down just burnt that into my head a little bit. And it actually, like, there's some interesting takeaways from some of the conversations that we had and everything. So yeah, my answer is yes, definitely.
Yeah. It's almost like the first time you watch a movie, you really enjoy it and it's great. But there's so many things that you miss that you don't realize you missed until you watch it again a second time, and then it's almost a whole different experience. And I kind of felt that way when I was writing about events because I'm remembering what's happening, but then I'm also thinking about the context of everything,
Yeah.
and it's almost like you experience it in this different way, and you find these deeper meanings in just very simple things that happen.
That's actually a really good point. In the moment, you don't have context. You're in the moment. You're having to absorb information as it comes. But
Yeah,
after the fact, you get to see it all, and you can kind of think, hey, I want to hang on to this. This is kind of important. Or I see how this connects to other parts of my life now.
yeah. And there was a couple times where I'm writing, and I'd write down, oh, and he said this, and then I was thinking, well, wait a minute, did he say that because of this thing that happened? Like, I never considered that in the moment. I just kind of accepted it happening. But thinking back of the context, it might have been different than the way I interpreted it in the moment. So it was definitely interesting. But there were other times which I found myself being very unable to remember exact conversations. So one day I get to work and I go into this elevator with, one of my friends and another coworker, and we ride the elevator, and we leave the elevator, we go into the office, and then we sit down at our desks. Super simple. So I'm trying to write it down that evening, and I remember that somebody tells a joke, but I cannot remember a single word that any of us said for the entire time that we were together. I'm sitting there trying really, really hard to remember anything we talked about. And all I remember was that there was a joke. I have no idea what it was about, no idea what we talked about, anything that was said. And it was just so kind of alarming that, this was, I don't know, it's just how many of those experiences just disappear. It was so weird. I could remember the situation, but none of the words. It was as if it was a silent movie or something. It was just totally quiet. It was so weird. It's like my brain completely ignored the auditory part of that or couldn't connect it. It was really strange.
I don't know if I had that exact experience, but I couldn't help but reflect on memory. And I know we've talked about it a lot, but memory is just such a fundamental part of the human experience. And the more you think about it, the more you realize how unbelievably important it is. And it actually is scary in some ways, just to think that you can have this experience and then it just goes away. It's gone. And you don't even remember that it happened. That kind of freaks me out in a way. Mm-hmm. It's, if nothing else, like from this podcast, from the past couple of years, the idea of memory and making that a big priority is like one of the most fundamental things that we've come upon. Yeah, and the journaling absolutely really just brought that up even more, I think.
I completely forgot what I was going to say.
Well, if you remember it, feel free to jump in. But I want to change tack a little bit. So the goal of this was to focus on reflection and memory and try to recall things. And to me, that was super valuable. I think prioritizing your memory is something everyone should be doing. But you had said it was a lot more than that, and it was for me too. So what were some of the other things that you found yourself using it for? What other directions did it take you?
Oh God, I don't know where to start. Okay, so in writing down let me just say this before we go to that. One thing people were starting to talk about in the Discord is, what's the point of writing down all of these little mundane things? How about we skip all the mundane stuff and talk about the real exciting things? And I've kept little journals before, and I've written down stuff that seemed really, really mundane at the time. And then you read them years later, and they are very not mundane. Like, okay, here's an example that's actually not to do with writing. But, okay, so years ago, we live at my older house. My friend comes over, we hang out just like any other day. We're just sitting around drinking coffee, okay? And my dog, who is usually not super friendly, comes up and lays down next to my friend. And we're just chilling, hanging out, drinking coffee, talking about art or whatever. Typical day, nothing weird about it. So I snap a picture and I send it to Heather, just thinking, oh, this is kind of funny that the dog is hanging out with him. So typical mundane day, but a couple years, like fast forward a couple years later, and the friend died, the dog died. We move out of the house. Literally everything in that picture has been broken or sold or gone. It's really weird. The coffee cup that he's holding, I dropped a couple years later and it just shattered. And it was fall time, so there were some fall decorations. Just little plastic stuff you don't think about. Well, Heather had dropped something on them like a year or two later, and all of them broke, these little pumpkins. And it's so weird because I never realized it, but I was looking at the picture recently and I realized that everything is gone. And every single one of those things, I just thought that they'd be there forever. So when you're writing about really simple things, it's just interesting because they don't stay simple forever. I guess is what I'm saying. And so there was a lot of things just like about work that I'd be writing down. And I'm thinking, God, this is kind of annoying to write down because it's so typical. But I guess I try to make sure that I include some of that because it doesn't always last forever, I guess. I'm not trying to sound dark. It's just, and sometimes in a really fun way, like I don't know. I can't think of a fun example, but like maybe I don't work at this place forever. And so the mundane things of this place will seem, even though they might be kind of bland or boring at the time, a couple years from now, it might be really fun to look back at that stuff. So in journaling or writing down, it's interesting to focus on things sometimes, not always, but it's interesting to focus on things that you don't normally focus on. Sometimes they give you answers that you wouldn't normally get simply because you would never consider to question them, if that makes sense.
So not to get too into philosophy and whatnot, but okay, what that makes me think of, this isn't to do with journaling necessarily, but I remember I spent 4 years in a music degree in college. And when I think back to that experience, it's a certain environment with certain people, and there's these very important moments that happen where you
Right.
You graduate, you do your senior recital, you do this and that. Like there's all these moments that are supposedly really important. But when I just think back, the memories that stick out aren't those. I
Right.
remember just from that 4 years, I remember sitting at the fountain at UCF practicing guitar. I remember how the fountain would be going, and I had this book of music, and it was, I don't know, just this kind of thin flat book with a glossy cover. And I remember sitting there messing with it, and if I held it at the right angle, it was almost like this sound mirror. Just the acoustics of the fountain and everything, like the white noise of the water would reflect off of the cover, and if you held it right, it would be really loud right in your ear. And it was kind of strange. I just, like, the first time I found that, I was like, whoa, that's weird that you could just hold it and then it's like in your ear and then it goes away. I'm like, that's crazy. I never really experienced that before. That's what stands out of my memory of UCF, is goofing around with the music book in front of the fountain, like playing with the white noise. Point being, the mundane stuff in your life, like we think of it as mundane or simple because we kind of have this value system that we subscribe to of, oh, the big moments in your life, this ceremony, this thing, this big event, you're, like I said, you graduate, your recital or whatever. But the stuff that just feels important, the stuff that defines my experience, that I invested a lot of energy and 4 years of my life into, like my memory of that is these really simple things that aren't, like, they're not that big of a deal. Or they didn't feel like a big deal at the time, but that actually defines that whole period of my life for me. So sitting there reflecting on the mundane stuff, I don't know if mundane is the way you should think about it.
Right. And I'm not saying that you should sit down at the end of every day and write down every single detail that you really don't care about. I'm just saying,
right.
Give some attention to that. Here's an example that's not so philosophical. It was just useful. Before I got my job a couple of years ago, when I was kind of teaching myself how to paint and everything, I got this commission to do these 2 really big paintings. And I had just done 2 really big paintings. And so I figured, and I was learning so much, like how to draw perspective, how to paint, how to, what the whole process is. So there's so many different things that I'm trying to learn. So I figured it might be useful if I keep a log of everything for that first or for this now third painting, but the first of the two paintings that I'm doing.
Yeah.
So I start the log and I kind of bored with it, so I'm working on the drawing, whatever, studies, learning stuff. And then at the end of the day, I'm kind of just, I guess I'll write it down, whatever. I'm really not thinking much about it. And it feels kind of like a chore to write it down. But these paintings were really big. In fact, they took me almost an entire year to do the two of them. Not because they're so amazing, but because I was just trying to learn so many different things at once. So for the first painting, I'm writing down a lot of stuff that doesn't seem all that important at the time. And even, I'm trying to keep track of what I'm doing, but also just the way I feel about it. So I would do these little, practice paintings or studies, and I would get really frustrated with them. Just, I wanted to quit art. I don't want to paint anymore. I don't want to do this anymore. I just would get so frustrated, and it felt like such a unique experience. And I'd write that down, write about it. And then other times I would write down, how good I felt or whatever. I just kept track of everything. So I finished that first one and I go to the second one. And I must have forgot about the log or something. And I'm no longer keeping the log. And I'm just working. I'm not even reading that first log that I did. And I'm working on the second painting and I run into these emotions like, oh God, I suck. I hate everything. I want to quit. Like, what am I doing? I don't know what's going on. Obviously, I'm a huge failure, whatever. And I start looking through stuff and I find the log and I open it up to the same point in the process that I'm in. And sure enough, I felt the exact same way. And I had totally forgotten about it. I had just written it off, I guess, whatever. And then I realized that I had been following these emotional arcs and just everything was lining up perfectly with this log. It was so weird and so eye-opening to me. And that's kind of just what got me interested in this whole way of thinking about stuff. Just how, I don't know, how informative that can be. Just knowing that you've thought these things before. And so I started finding shortcuts. Like, oh, if you get really frustrated, try doing this. If you run into a wall with, the perspective process, then try doing this. And so I set myself up a roadmap, and the second one was way easier. So sometimes the worth of what you write down is not always clear at the time. It only becomes worth something to you later, and you're not always sure what that's going to be. I guess that's all I'm saying with that.
Okay, so slightly different thing, but I think still related to what you're seeing there. So the biggest use of this that I wound up doing in the past month, and I didn't expect this, was therapy. Yeah. Last month was not my best.
Yeah.
Had some stuff going on, and there was a lot of kind of just down times of, man, feeling not good or kind of overwhelmed or whatever. And so, I'm thinking, I guess I'll write this stuff down because it's all I can think about. And that turns into, page after page of, okay, this and okay, that, and this is what I'm worried about, and this is what I'm worried about. And it felt a little bit like, at first, it didn't feel terribly productive. I'm worried about stuff. And so I'm writing it down. So I'm just
right.
So still worried about it. Yeah, right. Like, so,
who cares?
I wrote down crappy stuff. How does that help me? But it takes this swirling mass of illogical thoughts and parallel realities of this bad thing, no, this bad thing, and whatever. And it kind of forces you to funnel that into something linear and something concrete. And you have to make actual words out of it. And you write something and then you sit back and go, yeah, that doesn't make sense. That's not a possible thing. And it's after doing that a couple times, I would, a few days later, I'd be feeling bad. And I'm like, well, I can't wait to get home to write this stuff down because that is helpful. That will make me feel better. And that will help me sort through some of these things. And I can at least eliminate the stuff that's insane, that doesn't make any sense. And this turned out to be very useful on that front. that was, I mean it was because of just some kind of a rough month. I don't think it would have been necessarily the same, or that might not have been the most important thing for me if I were to do this a little while before or something. But for where I was at, that was like the most valuable part of it, was using it as a tool to try and deal with some of the stuff swirling around in my head.
Yes, absolutely. This is not really a journaling thing so much, maybe the way we were initially talking about it, but
Yeah.
this absolutely is kind of where I ended up. And you said it's sort of like this swirling mass of thoughts that you have to funnel down into a point. I came prepared with a metaphor where it was a swirling mass of thread, and your pen is like a pin, and you have to think about all these little threads or strands of thoughts one at a time and slowly untangle it and get it to go to this pinpoint focus.
Yeah.
And so because writing naturally does that, that's another thing I want to talk about, just what happens when you write. But because it naturally encourages you to have to make sense of thoughts before you put them down, you kind of have to slow down and examine things from all angles very slowly. And that gives you a chance, I don't know, to just sort of iron these things out. So when your head is this storm of thoughts and emotions, you're not totally sure what's going on, when you start writing them down, it just kind of slows down and
Yeah.
everything smooths out. And you start weaving this pattern of, I don't know, something that makes sense.
Yeah.
So
And
I was totally doing that as well.
it 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 didn't take that long for that to be a process that I wanted. Like, I just had this feeling of, man, I would like to do that again, because that was really helpful to me. I mean, it I I think if you think about a human being, think about us as a society for a second, right? Go way back to where we were just murdering each other and eating berries and stuff, right? And we weren't.
I mean, we're still murdering each other
Yeah,
and eating berries, but
that's true. We don't eat that many berries, and the murder to people ratio is a lot lower. Anyway, we weren't a whole lot better off than just your average animal, right? And then we start coming up with certain things like language, and we can communicate, and that had to have been big, being able to talk to each other, right? And then we came up with written language to where people could learn stuff and then write that down and give it to somebody else and give it to the next generation. They could start off maybe a little bit ahead of the last generation. And that was a huge deal. You think about the human brain and how on its own, it's actually kind of not that impressive. If you just took somebody and you put them in the woods and never taught them anything, they wouldn't be a whole lot different than an animal, I don't think. But you give them language, you give them writing, you give them these tools, and that's mostly why we're where we are today with houses and technology and the internet and everything, right? Here's my point. I think that writing, just writing stuff down is it's it it's so valuable to us. It takes us beyond a pretty primitive brain. If you just think about how your brain kind of operates on its own, it's kind of not that impressive. It sits there and just hyper fixates on stupid things and goes in circles, and even with language and all the stuff that we've kind of learned, it's still a bit of a mess. And I think that you really need to use some of these tools to bring yourself beyond that kind of messy state. And just this month of writing has made writing feel like this very fundamental thing to me, that it is becoming extremely valuable, where I think I'm just going to do this forever, because it just, I think my mind is not that great on its own.
Yeah, well, I'm really glad that you liked this so much. I didn't expect you to like it this much, but I'm very glad that you did. Okay, maybe I don't know. I don't know what I thought you'd think about it, but I didn't expect you to like it this much.
I mean, it's not like I've never written things down in my life before, but building
This
it
is a little
into
different.
it is well, and that's what I mean. It is different. It's different to do it every day, where it becomes a thing that you do. It's more habitual. It just, you start to see it differently and you start to value it differently. And I mean, there were many moments, especially early on, where I'm thinking, all right, I guess I'll write stuff down. I'm not really sure why I'm doing this. It just seems like kind of a waste of time. And you grind through a few days of that, or however much time of just writing stuff, not really sure why. And it took a little while before I start to think, hey, wow, I'm thinking differently.
Yeah.
This is causing my mind to function a bit differently. I mean, I've heard people call it a second brain or whatever, and I don't love that marketing, but there's something to that. There's something to this idea that if you want to function as a human operating at a high level, using written language just for yourself, not even to communicate with somebody else, but just using it, is a really powerful tool.
So this might be a little bit out there, but
Go for it. We're getting there.
Okay. So in doing that little classical challenge that I was doing, I realized that I've very quickly, when you're trying to come up with a picture on the spot from imagination, whatever, you need material to draw from. And anyone in any creative field, you need access to a lot of material when you go to create something, right? Because imagination is nothing more than the combination of two or more things. And so you
Okay.
need things to combine and create with, right? So I realized when I was doing that, when I would go to create something, I just had like nothing. It just wasn't there at the.
Classical challenge is where you listen to a classical piece of music and then attempt to create sort of a sketch piece of art inspired by this classical piece. Okay.
Right. I feel like I've explained it
I
too
know,
many
but
times, but yeah, okay. Yes, that's what you do. And so it's very, I don't know, it's kind of personal. It's like, just stuff that you're thinking about, you have to create it. So I kind of went a bit philosophical with this, and I started thinking, well, what are the things in my life that I have cared about before? In the last few years, I've been very technically minded, very focused on technical skills and whatever. And I've kind of lost, just through the daily ritual of going to a 9 to 5 job, coming home, drilling through practice stuff, whatever. I've kind of lost a lot of this deeper meaning of why I do art in the first place. So it hit me that I needed to do something about that. So what do? The answers to me are probably in the past, a lot of experiences I've had or memories or whatever, but I'm never thinking about the past in any great depth. Like, it's just not a part of my daily routine.
Mhm.
So with the writing stuff, I kind of mixed it in with the meditation stuff. And stop me at any point if it stops making sense, because it's kind of weird. But what I decided to do was, during my 10 minutes of meditation in the morning, I would pick a room, a symbolic room from my past to go visit, okay? It could be a classroom that I was in, or a gymnasium at my school, or
a real physical place that you're recalling from your childhood.
yes, there's a quote from House MD, where I'm not going to remember it exactly, but one of the patients says, that's all life is. It's a series of rooms, and who you get stuck in that room with is what life amounts to, or something along those lines. So life is a series of rooms. And I've always liked that, because That's
I
kind of what
think
it
I
is.
remember that episode. Yeah.
So that's kind of what I went with, is I'm going to visit not a certain time in the past. Like, I'm going to think about 7th grade. It was, I'm going to think about this exact classroom and try to remember as much as I possibly can about this one room. So I would think about that for 10, 15, 20 minutes, and then I would write about it for about 25 minutes. And as I'm writing about it, you're slowly combing through these threads of memory and thinking about all these different parts of the memory and experiences. And it was so, I don't know about enlightening, but it was very informative. And I started to remember, oh, that's why I like this stuff. That's why I like this thing. This is why I think this way. This is the kind of stuff I want to draw pictures of. Oh yeah, I used to really like, this movie or this book or this story or whatever. And it started providing me with all kinds of material and information. And now I have journals full of content to use for any picture going forward. And I've begun to construct this, it sounds a bit epic. It's not that epic, but it's just this little universe of ideas that I can draw from at any time. And God, I'm really ranting now, but I was watching this interview with Eminem, someone who has to keep, any rapper has to keep a lot of words and a lot of ideas on the tip of their brain, at the top of their brain, quick, easy access to all of these ideas because they have to come up with it on the spot if they're doing a freestyle or whatever. So I watched this interview with Eminem, and I was wondering, well, how does he do it? Does he type it all up on a computer and then just, remember it? Does he put it in his phone? How does he do it? And he writes it all down on paper. And he says he does that because he can remember exactly where it was in a book and where it was on the page. And when he says he also uses his phone, but the problem with the phone is that when you use the phone, he can never find it again. So he puts it in the phone. He has no reference point. He has no material thing to tie it to. So he loses that note. But back to my point. He fills these pages up with all these ideas. And actually, one second. So I printed out one of his pages because I just thought it was very interesting. This is the lyric sheet for Lose Yourself. And if you look at it, it looks insane. I don't know if you've seen this before, but there's just words everywhere. Mm-hmm. It's not in a narrative format at all. It's just these little lines.
You're showing this handwritten thing with words just kind of splattered all over the page. It's not typewritten in Word or something.
Yeah, if you're just listening, look up Lose Yourself lyric sheet from Eminem or something like that. And there's just like single lines of words just everywhere on the page. And he fills these pages up like this. And then he puts them all in a box, okay? And when he's in the studio, he has this box of loose papers with just words scrawled across all of the papers. And I think that whether he does this intentionally or not, or even if this is why he does it, I have no idea. I'm just theorizing. But I think the reason he does that is to have access to all of these ideas sort of at once. And he just builds this library of content that he can use at any time, both, in a physical way and a mental memory way. And so I've been trying to do that with my own experiences. And I don't know, it's hard to explain to someone that's not an artist or whatever, but I think you probably get the picture. I've been trying to build this little world of content. Does any of that make sense, or am I just rambling?
No, the problem is that you said way too much in the past 5 minutes, so I'm like, okay, first off, what you're saying about rooms.
Oh yeah, I talked about, I've been saying a lot. Sorry.
Yeah, let's back up for a second. So I told you that my memory of my time at UCF was things like me sitting by the fountain with the paper, right? This physical space that I'm in. I also remember the recital hall and all the times I sat in there, and just the physical place that I occupied. I remember the chairs and how they had the little metal legs, and if you stuck your finger in and somebody wiggled around, you'd smash your finger. Like I remember the physical space so well. I remember the classroom that I always got stuck in, and I remember every time I was in there looking at these filing cabinets that were stuck against the wall that nobody used, and just thinking, why did they leave those there? They've been here for like 4 years. Get rid of them. They're ugly. Why are they here? And I think back to seventh grade, and I remember the gymnasium that we'd always go into, and the pegboards on the wall. I remember the room where they kept the skates and the little bouncy balls that people would hit each other with in dodgeball, which was kind of a weird thing to let kids do.
Yeah, that was one of the rooms that I
Yeah.
did. Yeah, continue.
I don't know the point here. Just I know that the memory palace is this really powerful technique for memory, where you basically take a room and then you just fill it with random things that you're thinking about, like your grocery list and stuff. Like put that on the couch and put the eggs on the table by the couch and then put this over there. You just use your memory of this physical space to kind of fill it with other stuff. But clearly, there is something extremely powerful and pretty deeply wired into us about physical spaces. I mean, I can go back through my childhood, and most of my memories of periods in my life revolve around rooms. You're very right about that. And I don't even know what the implication. Yeah.
It was like this reverse memory palace. Is that I'm visiting these previous palaces or these previous rooms that I've been in, and it was very effective in being able to revive some of these memories that I haven't thought about in years. It was interesting, and I've been wanting to talk about that for a while with you, but I didn't want to overtake the whole journaling conversation.
Well,
but
that's what
I've
I'm
been
saying.
using journaling to do this, because without the journaling, I'm just sort of free floating, thinking about this stuff, and it's really hard to make sense. But when I add the journaling into it, and it becomes a real investigation into my past, and it's just been a super effective way to, I don't know, to just revisit some of those things.
I don't even know what to do with that idea yet, because I haven't really thought about it that way. But you say that, and I think back to most memories of my life, and they are tied to rooms, which is just kind of a crazy thought.
I wrote that down, that exact same thing down. And I realized, because I did this in a couple different places, and I don't know if this is accurate or whatever, but it's just what I found, is that in every single memory I could recall, decently well, it was always tied to not just a room, but like an object. If I remember talking to a person, they were sitting in an exact chair. If I remember a certain situation, I was holding an exact phone. In any case, that was the case. There was also, if it was me and one other person, there was always another object or scene prop in the memory, which was just really surprising. But what I also found was that when I chose the gymnasium as one place to think about, and I'm mentally walking into the gymnasium, and all of my strongest memories are on the perimeter of the gymnasium. And maybe I'm just drawing conclusions where they shouldn't be drawn. But my strongest memories are on the perimeter. And I'm like, why can't I remember a single thing from the center of the gymnasium? And then I was thinking, well, is it because there are no objects in the middle of an empty gymnasium? Is it because there's just less to grab a hold of? I don't really know. But it was really frustrating to me that it's like in my memory, I couldn't walk past a certain point. I don't know. It was just really interesting to start considering objects and props and scenery and how important they are to your memory.
I don't know what to do with that, because I'm like a little bit stunned, because I'm thinking about the gymnasium. I mean, we're actually talking about the same room.
Yeah.
It's a big room, but it's a room.
Yeah, the one with the pegs on the wall. And
right. Yeah, I remember in seventh grade being made fun of by these other kids, and I remember they were, which is kind of funny, they were making fun of me, saying I look like Elvis, which is really not an insult. Elvis was pretty cool.
Did you say that to them?
No, at the time it felt incredibly hurtful. I haven't thought about this until now because it's this weird buried memory, but they were in the gymnasium. There was some kind of, I don't know what the gym class was, but there was this mat, like this big foamy mat, and they were on the mat and I was next to it. I was like walking by. They were like, "Oh, you look like Elvis," which again, very hurtful at the time. Now that I think about it, that's fine. But it's a memory that is tied to a physical space and a physical object, and like that's how
Right.
I remember it. I remember this mat. How is that relevant?
I don't know. I
But
don't know.
yeah,
But yeah, that's what I kept finding.
I can think about the hallway attached to that gym and some of the things that were said in the hallway or in the locker room. Everything seems like it's tied to some space. That's so weird to think about. That I don't know what to do with that, but that is kind of blowing my mind a little bit.
Right. And then the other thing I was finding is that maybe it's just me, but I had such I do have such an inability to remember conversations from the distant past. It's one thing. I mean, I had some trouble with it just doing it, at the end of a day and trying to recall from that day. But when you go into the past, in the movies, they always do these flashbacks where you remember every single word that's said.
Yeah.
I could not remember, and this is scary. I'm thinking about some of the most important parts of my life, and I can't remember a single word that's being said. I remember the chairs we sat in. I remember the room we're in, maybe even the lighting, the expressions on our faces, the feeling of the whole general scene. But I simply cannot remember the conversation. Maybe because the words don't mean as much as the context. But I don't know. But that was something that became kind of scary. And I don't know. It's just really interesting because I'm trying to write down, the whole scene and what was said. And then as soon as I get to what was said, I go blank. And I can't remember. And it's really weird.
Well,
I don't think I have some disorder. I just think it's really difficult for me, especially, to remember exact conversations, the words that were said. You'll probably have to try this out to.
No, I know.
talk about it
I'm
more.
a little bit okay. Like you said, you did your little 5-minute spiel, and there's so many different things that kind of I want to talk about. So part of the inspiration for the journaling thing was Dracula, and in particular Mina. And in her journal, she talks about journaling, which is kind of meta, but how it's this, she's trying to, I can't remember the quotes, but one of the things she talks about is trying to recall this full conversation word for word with Van Helsing, where he
Right.
comes over and tells her all this crazy stuff, and they're starting to figure out what's going on. And so she's writing her journal as if she's recalling this information that she had that day with Van Helsing. And it's a fictional story, but it's still an interesting thought of, can you do that? Can you actually really recall an entire information or an entire conversation word for word if you were to practice that and keep doing that? And I've never tried to do that before, because why would I? One day passes and you
Right.
go to the next. And I haven't tried it yet. I should. I took some kind of weak attempts, but I haven't actually sat down and tried to recall a conversation word for word after the fact. But it's a fascinating thing to try and do, and I bet that it's something you can get better at. That's something that Mina was saying, is that it's like a skill that
absolutely.
you practice. The other thought, though, is that you're talking about this lyric sheet of Eminem. I'm reading Dracula, and there's this quote or this thing that Van Helsing says that I really liked. It was about how knowledge is more powerful than memory or something like that. And I don't even want to talk about that right now. But I read that. I was like, whoa, that's kind of crazy to think about. And I just keep reading. And then later I'm thinking, what was that quote? I want to see that again. And I couldn't remember the exact words, but I remembered exactly where it was on the page. I knew that it was, a couple lines down on the left, right here. I could like remember the shape of where the words were, the physical
Right.
space of the words, which is so weird because you're reading. I mean, every page looks roughly the same. It's a bunch of lines on a page in the same pattern, but I can still remember where it was physically. And what that makes me think about is how mostly we write stuff on a computer, and there's, it's an infinite scroll or whatever. It's not a physical thing. There's no, it's all exactly the same. There's no nuance to it, but we seem to have such a powerful uh tendency to remember physical spaces and even physical layouts on a page. So, in this with my own handwriting, it's very easy to remember, oh, I wrote this down here in the middle of the page. There just seems to be something really powerful about that we are clearly very wired into, and it does kind of feel like we're losing a lot of that with just typing things or relying on other systems where I don't know that we've really captured the value of the physical space of a page.
Right.
When you kind of jump to some of that technological stuff.
Yeah. And I think that's why I really love the journals. They almost take on, when you finish one, they almost take on their own sort of aura or their own like attitude. And I also name mine when I'm done because I have so many. They're mostly sketchbooks. And so I just have like 20 filled black sketchbooks that all look exactly the same. So I started naming them, and when I'm done, I flip through, find something that's kind of, representative and sounds kind of cool. And then I write that on the front. And it helps me remember what's in that journal or what's in that sketchbook. So that's what I started doing with these.
Fantastic. I haven't finished this one yet, but I'm going to name it when I'm done. I like that.
So the other thing I started doing was just one of the biggest drawbacks of a journal, or I even kind of hate calling it a journal because it just brings up, I don't know, like you're some teenager and you got a little heart locket on it or whatever. This is cooler than that, okay?
Right. This is badass journaling.
Right. This is like fancy writing. Anyway, one of the biggest drawbacks, if you compare it to electronic writing, is that you can't search for stuff. And it is, even though some ways it's very easy to remember where it was and you can remember more about the content, it's sometimes hard to find it in a book or on your shelf or whatever. So what I started doing is, I name the book, but I also do like a key in the front. I have circle, square, triangle, and then, symbols, whatever. So if I'm writing a journal page, I'll put a circle on the top corner. If I'm writing about art, I'll put a triangle. If I write about the visitor room thing, I put a square. And so I have instant. Did you already do this too?
Yeah.
You're smiling like, okay.
Yeah, no, I just
yeah. So you have like different categories of the way you're writing, and it just really helps to figure out what you're looking at.
So the way I kind of settled on for that is I mostly treat this as I'm not really intending to read it again. It's not documentation that I'm going to refer to over and over. Mostly it's stuff I'm writing down, stuff that I'm thinking about. Like that's kind of the default, where the stuff that goes in here, I'm not planning on rereading it. It's mostly about just me writing it down and the actual the benefits of that process. Some of it is I'll make a to-do list. So I made a grocery list today because why not? And that's something I'm going to refer to. But there are other. I have this little key, and so a little I is an idea, something I want to think about again. Like, oh, I could try this. A star is something that's pretty significant, a bit of a revelation, or hey, I think I need to do this, or just kind of like an important thought. A TD is a to-do item, and that's something I am intending to go back to, and they're kind of written along the margin, so it's really easy to pick these out. And then F is a flashcard, and that's something that I want to put into the spaced repetition system, a thing that I'm going to memorize and commit to permanent memory. And so I have these little system of picking things out for, okay, this is not just part of the flow of stuff. This actually has a destination where I'm going to refer back to it, or I'm going to put it into my flashcard system or something like that. And so that's been what I've settled on, and that feels pretty good to me, where I'm not trying to make sure that everything's categorized. It's I'm just putting stuff down, but then it's relatively easy to kind of pick things out and say, okay, this is going to be permanent. This has a destination, and stuff like that.
One other thing I did, because a couple people were talking about, they write on note cards or they write on, Post-its or note cards or whatever, and they just kind of pile up and they don't really know what to do with them. So they started going electronic and writing things that way.
Yeah.
Well, I've always loved the tactile stuff. So I love writing on Post-its and note cards and whatever I can get my hands on. But yeah, it started creating a huge mess, and I didn't know what to do with everything. So I got a big folder, or a big moleskin, and I keep one at my desk at work, and I keep one at home. And I also do these little Post-its all the time. But when I'm done with those, I just take a glue stick and I shove them into the big one. And so the big one becomes like this giant scrapbook where, sometimes I use it directly right in, but then I also glue in these Post-its and note cards or whatever, anything I want to glue in there. And then I also ordered this little pad for boats. So it's a waterproof drawing pad, and I put that in my shower so I can take shower notes.
I thought about doing. I didn't actually get one, but I kind of wish I did. I like that idea.
Oh, it's amazing. And I think I was telling you about this, but it's like on a pad, and you take it off the pad and you can just stick it onto the tile. And so if you looked at my shower, it looks like a crazy person lives in there, because there's just these notes all over the tile. And when there's, it looks insane. But after there's a few too many, I take them off and then glue them into the book. But that got me, and we should probably wrap things up. But that got me thinking about just writing all these little note cards down, all this stuff, or writing anything down. We have so many little passing thoughts and ideas that come to us throughout the day. I mean, so many.
Yeah.
And I've begun to realize that it doesn't even matter if they're good or bad. That almost doesn't come into the equation. Because what makes an idea good most of the time is the work you put into it, or the amount of time you spend on it. So I was getting these little fleeting ideas of, I could do a painting on, say, a ship on a water, okay? And I'm like, that's kind of a dumb idea. I'm not going to write that down. I'll just continue doing whatever. But then I got, all these different ways of writing things down. So I would write down, okay, painting with a ship. And, forget about it, whatever. Come back the next day, and and I've written down a different note of, sea monster. And I'm going, I painting of ship with a sea monster. And then I start thinking, sea monsters are kind of cool. I remember this one memory of a sea monster way back in the day that I saw in a book or something. That was super interesting. And then I start doing research. And then all of a sudden I have tons of content to go with this, initially, a really stupid idea, right? So now I've built this stupid idea that I almost passed on into this entire project. And so I've started looking at ideas that way. Whereas, I hate the metaphor, but ideas are little seeds. And you can collect a whole bunch of seeds, but if you don't know how to garden, they're just trash, like they're nothing. And so being able to write things down, or treating those stupid little passing ideas as, worthy of at least just scribbling down quickly. If you can just get them in the ground, I don't even want to continue with the stupid metaphor, but
I
you
get it.
You get it.
Yes. And we got to wrap this up at some point. There's so many things that we could talk about with writing. It's such an incredible avenue. That is one of the major things that I also found was if I'm in a creative mindset where I'm getting ideas, I'm thinking about something, and I'm starting to. I mean, it could be as simple as, oh, I gotta come up with a name for this project I'm working on, or anything. When I'm really in a creative mindset and I'm like ideas are happening, that mode of thinking is not really conducive to memory. Where I have an idea, but the nature of being creative is you're exploring and thinking about new things. You aren't sitting there fixating on something you thought about a minute ago, because that prevents you from exploring new areas. So these things just kind of happen, and you think, oh, hey, sea muster in a ship. That's a cool idea. And then you think, wait, no, let's think about a human powered plane flying through a sunset. And no, let's think about this and that. And like your mind is just wandering. And it actually feels really important to be able to capture that idea in a very low friction way. You know, if you have to pull out your phone and then unlock it, and then Face ID doesn't work, so you got to do it again, and then you have to find the app, and then it's like, hey, can you please rate our app 5 stars, and blah blah blah, and you're like, no, and then it's like, why not? Are you unhappy with this app? Like, no, I'm not unhappy. I just don't want to rate it 5 stars. Like, are you sure? Like, yeah, I'm definitely sure. And then you got to go find a thing and put in the note. That's not it. Like, you're gone. You need this really fast, simple way of just getting the idea down to where you don't even have to engage with it very much, and then you're just letting your mind go to the next thing. And that's the best way that I've found to handle that type of creative thinking, where you're just exploring and having things come to you. And so many times I'll go through that process and just have all this random stuff written down, and some of it's dumb, some of it's cool, and I'll go back to it the next day and think, holy crap, I don't remember any of this stuff. You know, there are so many ideas here that they would have been completely gone, except that I was able to, get them down and kind of externalize the memory. And it's, again, I think that using written language is part of what makes us where we're at. Like it there's kind of this feeling of, is that really how your brain ought to work? I mean, should I really have to rely on a book to write things down? And I think the answer is yeah. I think that's where we're at. If you want to hit your full potential, you need to use your written language and your spoken language. And I mean, the language is part of how you think. You think with words, at least at times, and everything. And being able to leverage your written language is just a fundamental part of operating well as a person.
There are so many lost civilizations that we know absolutely nothing about, simply because they didn't write down their history. Yeah. They just didn't keep a record of it. And not that, this writing is for self-preservation or making your name last or whatever. No one's going to read it when you die.
Right.
But it's just, there's just so much use for writing down important things to you.
I mean, my concern is just me communicating with future me. Being able to externalize thoughts and recall them later. And I know exactly what you're saying, but the future civilization is just me in the future.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, we should probably wrap it up.
Yeah, there's so many other things we could talk about with writing. It's the more you think about it,
because it's a tool. It's an instrument, and there are so many things you can do with an instrument and a tool. Like, the journaling is just this tiny little thing.
Yeah, and it's a deeply fundamental, deeply powerful tool, and I think that I was so on board with tech and with smartphones when they came out, and social networks and everything. And now, after a little while, I feel like there are some things that are really cool, but most of it's a scam, and it's not that great. And I don't think that taking notes on your phone is better than writing notes in a notebook. I mean, it's fine. I'm not saying don't do it, but just simple, pure writing stuff down with a pen or a pencil on paper. We haven't beat this yet. with technology, the to-do lists, the systems. I mean, I do think spaced repetition is huge, and I do think that technology has a role to play in that. You could do it manually, but it's a little bit easier with technology. So I that is something I think. But just in terms of writing, like, technology distracts us from that in most cases, and it's just really, really powerful. And this is one of the things I intend to do forever.
Yeah. And, everyone was posting when we started this challenge. Everyone started posting their new pens and their new
Yeah.
new little journals and stuff, and it just made me so happy. I love this kind of thing. Just, I don't know. I just love it. But okay.
Yes. All right, that was a long one. Thanks everyone for listening. I know we've been a little off and on. Mostly my fault. It's been a rough month or two. But remember, the challenge for this month is to pick something that you really wanted to do and do it for 2 minutes every day at a specific time, or at least after a specific daily event, like getting your coffee, taking a shower, or whatever. So that's what we're doing this month. Let's find out if that works together. Leave us a comment, send us an email, theoveranalyzerspodcast@gmail.com. We would love some reviews on some podcast sites if that's something you're into. Otherwise, we will see you next week.